I'm Marina Lafrosia.
And I'm Monica Birch. And this is your new summer reading list.
Where we take a look at your favorite,
or maybe your least favorite,
required reading books.
Today, if you can guess between the 1920s getup for those watching, Marina's dressed as a flapper for those listening, and our bookies, that again, if you're listening, we have The Great Gatsby in front of us, because that's what we read. Woohoo!
Okay, yeah, so we're talking about The Great Gatsby today, by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So I'm very excited to talk about this one.
I am too.
I think this is like a fan fave as well.
Yeah.
I feel like this is the first book I actually posted like on our Instagram that we were gonna read, and then like people responded being like, "Yay, I'm so excited for that." So
definitely made our list quite early on of like which books should we do. So we're ready.
Okay, so before we start the discussion for today's book, we wanted to take a second and say thank you to all of you lovely listeners, viewers, for like watching and supporting us for the past few episodes. We wanted to read some reviews as like a little thank you for like taking your time to like leave a review. That's the easiest way to help us on the show. You can go to our iTunes and just leave a review. So we'll go ahead and pick some that we wanted to share.
Yeah, so I'll read first. This is from Back Rebecca. Sorry if I botched your handle, but you said, "This is such a great way to dive into these books. I'm more of a movie fan versus reading the novels, but this really provides perspective that I've never caught onto in the stories. Analyzing the themes is very insightful. You both make it interesting."
Thank you. So nice.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
So we have one here from Jenna, and it's titled Woohoo. This podcast is so fun to listen to. I barely finished any of these books in high school because I always dreaded reading assignments, but I love reading along and listening to all of their interesting ideas on the books. Smiley face.
Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you. I feel very grateful that you guys took your time to like leave a little review. Again, that's like the easiest way to help us out. So if you want to pop on over there, it takes like 2 seconds. You could even just like leave the stars and like a smiley face.
Yeah, that would be grateful.
That would be great.
That would be grateful. I would be grateful.
Okay, so now we will go ahead and start like we usually do and kind of
Gatsby.
like go with our past experience of the book and if we can repeat the past, perhaps.
Ooh, that would be a really fun quote to save for a time travel book we do one day.
Yes, we'll just take our inspiration right from Gatsby.
Yes.
Okay, so
do you want to go first or you want me to go first? You were giving me a look.
I was giving you a look.
You were. I can read your face. I can go first.
Okay.
So, I've actually read Gatsby a few times. I think this is the first one of the books I've actually read twice instead of just once. I think, yeah. I read it when I was a freshman in high school, which doesn't sound in my mind that long ago, but it's been a long time. It's been a really long time.
Count that.
Sorry. I just read it as like if you went to school around where we did, we had like AR books where you just got to like pick any book from the list and then take a quiz on it to prove you actually like understood. So that was one I chose and I really liked it then. And then senior of high school, thinking of the year that was, I read it as like a legit class book and we went over it with one of our really good teachers at our high school. Doc Star is amazing. So yeah, it was really cool. He actually recently posted like art I did from The Great Gatsby on his Facebook and I was like, thank you.
Get him to post to us.
I
in
know.
this podcast. Shout out to you for posting it because I know you're going to post our podcast now.
Doc Star.
Doc Star.
I mean, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, that was really cool. So I've always really liked this book. Also, on top of that, I've seen the movie, the newer one with like Leonardo DiCaprio and Tobey Maguire a lot. Partly because I used to be a big Leonardo DiCaprio fan, and just because like it's a decent movie where like if I just feel like watching something, I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm very familiar with the story.
I'm about the peak cap age to date Leonardo DiCaprio now. So
that's
after
right.
25, he doesn't go older than that. So
Leo.
Missing out on my golden years, I guess.
I remember being in high school watching this, being like, oh, I'm too young for him, and now I'm like, no.
You're like, they're all too young for him.
No, now he would do this age. Not me, though.
Okay, so.
Your experience.
My experience. I read the book in senior year of high school also. I feel like it's a very common, especially for AP Lit.
I was just about to say it's like an AP Lit one because it's like you can write about it on the exam.
I was going to say, especially like in, I don't know, maybe in other states it's different, but AP Lit in Florida, I feel like Gatsby is a staple. I actually read the novel, so my senior year was actually when the movie like came out, that Leonardo DiCaprio one. So I think the movie came out in 2013, so it was like right before Christmas, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. But I just remember because then the movie was new. Yeah. But it had come out on like DVD and stuff or whatever. DVD, I feel like that sounds old to say. So it had come out already. So we got to watch it like after we read it in the spring, because that was 2014. So it was really fun because then we kind of had that element in it too. And my teacher wasn't one of those that was like, oh, like the movie is gonna suck or whatever. So like she was into like letting us watch that after we read it and everything.
It's a good teacher.
Yeah, shout out to Miss Roberts. She was the best teacher like ever.
Both of our senior
but
year
yeah,
teachers.
So I actually really liked it a lot, like when I first read it. And I'm not sure if I'm like conflating that with like the discussions we had like afterwards, but like I remember those just being really fun to have in class because there's just a lot to talk about in the short story that Gatsby is. Like it's a very short novel, but I feel like we talked about it more than like all of the other books that we did. Yeah,
that's something I was mentioning to you earlier, is that like this book looks so tiny, like
very small,
just a tiny little thing. But there's more to talk about than like so many just big novels.
Yes, so, I think so.
Same with other books we've had to read, which maybe that's why they're classics. But like, yeah, I felt that with The Giver. It was just like there were so many things I could say.
Yeah, and then we accidentally talked for 2 hours. So. But yeah, so I think I really liked it the first time I read it, and that was pretty much my experience. Yeah. It was a high school book.
So now we usually like to say how we felt now. Yes. So do you want to do that now?
Yeah, sure. I can go right into it. So now my experience reading it, I still really loved it. Spoiler alert. I feel like maybe I'm just not remembering how much I liked it then, but I definitely like loved it now. So maybe I like it even more now. But I don't know, the way that Fitzgerald writes is just like, I really like it a lot. His style of writing is like great. And I actually did get to listen to the audiobook version of it as well, which I think I'm going to start doing for like all of our books, which I would also recommend just for people. Because, I don't know, when you hear somebody, or even if you just read sentences out loud to yourself, also gives you that same effect. Just because I think you can really like hear the writing better, and it's almost like, I don't know, there's places where it almost seems like melodic the way he writes. Yeah. So I really love that, and I know that seems like a nerdy thing to say. No, and you don't pick up on that. I love like how his sentences sound, but yeah, it's just like sometimes like it would get read, and I'm like, wow, I did not think that that was gonna be like a something that really hit me until he read it out loud.
Maybe that's why people win awards for audiobooks.
That makes sense.
Because I've always thought that was interesting, but I'm like, can I do that?
Yeah, and even the one that the one that I read to, like, or the one that I listened to, like, the guy didn't even do like a whole bunch of voices and stuff, which like I listened to like from our last book, like Murder on the Orient Express. Like there was so much acting in that. So many voices. It was weird. In the one that I listen to now, he just kind of had his voice, but he had like such a good narration voice. One of those where you're like, okay, I can really focus, and it's not like one of those ones where you're gonna fall asleep. But yeah, I don't know. I really liked it. Fitzgerald's like style of writing, I really enjoy, and I actually don't think I've read any of his other like works. No, so I think that this is like a good reminder for me now to like go back and check out some of his other writing,
which are technically in this big fat book that we have here in front of us. And I bought it thinking it was just Gatsby, and then I actually read the cover and it says "and other works," and I'm like, oh, cool. And
then we realized that you can fit like 5 Gatsbys in there, so it has to be like all of his writing.
I was just like, maybe art's in here. Didn't think it through. Yeah. But I can go ahead and say mine. I also really loved the book. I will say it did take me a second to start reading, which I feel like I say almost every episode. But this time I think it was because I know the story so well that it was kind of just like, okay, I know. But like I did want to get through it a little bit to pick up on things I might have forgotten or like aren't in the movie or aren't in the main plot, but like are sub things. But yeah, that took me a second because I was like, I know the story, it's fine.
You have to get back in the groove.
Yeah. So, but otherwise I did love this story. So yeah.
That's good. Okay, so overall, very positive start.
Much more positive than we usually do.
Yeah, that's true actually. Okay, so should we jump right into like kind of explaining the plot and
sometimes we do the author first, or so do you want to do plot or author?
We always do the author first, Don't say sometimes when you know it's always.
I'm
Okay,
too
yes.
passive.
We need to talk about F. Scott Fitzgerald before we get into the plot of the book.
Marina calling me out.
Okay, so let's describe him a little bit.
I think it's because of what you're about to say is why you forgot.
Yeah, that is like not.
There's not much.
I feel like last few authors we just had so many.
They've had some
things
very
to say.
interesting things going on.
Yeah. Okay, so F. Scott Fitzgerald, he was kind of just born to like an upper middle class family in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. Midwestern.
And okay, something interesting though that we can say that I found out about him was that he was actually named after his second cousin, thrice removed, who was Francis Scott Key.
Very strange.
You know, the person who wrote The Star-Spangled Banner. Which, what? Weird. Anyways.
Always weird how you see certain celebrity connections. It's like, that doesn't make sense to
all
me.
the celebrities are related, even back in the day.
Somehow writing The Star-Spangled Banner gave him an up and his stuff would get published.
Yeah,
The
okay.
nepotism.
So apparently he like mostly grew up like in his childhood in like Buffalo, New York. So he just like with his family there. Both his parents were Catholic, but he didn't have like that. I don't know. There's not like crazy.
There's
things
not like
that
an
happened
odd
in his
story to
life.
pop out. Which I guess is
his
good.
wife was Zelda Fitzgerald, which I feel like a lot of people famously know because her name is Zelda.
Yeah, the name Zelda is pretty cool. Which isn't that? I'm saying isn't that one? I'm like 99% sure. That's also the name of
Are you talking about The Legend of Zelda?
No.
Okay, I was like,
No, Robin Williams.
Yes.
Is that his name? That's his daughter's name.
But that's specifically named for the video game.
But that's fine. I'm just
Yeah.
saying the name Zelda.
Yes, Zelda. That's her name.
I know it's not named after Fitzgerald. It's just one of those names that like pops out.
But yeah, so
I know the video game.
yeah, I was like,
I
friend
have
might
it
know.
on the Switch.
Good.
Showing my age by saying the Switch.
Wait, why is that age?
I don't know. My mom says the in front of words when she shouldn't, and so I do that now.
I feel like you can't say that sentence without a the.
Okay, you're right.
I mean, you could say like on Switch, but like
You're right. I said
that doesn't sound that weird. Anyways,
I think because I would have said it also as I'm playing the Switch instead of on my Switch or something like that.
Yeah. Okay, so I would say the only thing that's really interesting about him that people talk about is like his possible like affairs, I feel like. That
And
he
his
was
alcoholism.
like with Hemingway.
What? I didn't know that.
Oh, sorry. Maybe I should have said that in a more interesting way then.
No, that was it was like
okay, yeah.
It was like a bombshell for me.
So that is like one of the reasons that like we will definitely bring up that people think that there's like underlying like gay themes in Gatsby because he was like most likely gay or at least
I didn't
so
know
into
that.
men. Yeah. So that's fun.
That is interesting.
Which I feel like happened to a lot of the older writers because
Yeah, there's a lot of
you know, they couldn't really do
yeah.
anything about it then.
You kind of pick up on later through like hints in history
Yeah.
that you're like, oh, that seems
You're
fishy.
like, Okay, but yeah, and then the only other thing that I thought was like very weird was like possibly he locked his wife in the house when she was maybe having an affair and wanted to get a divorce from him, supposedly. Never confirmed. It's all alleged, so I'll just say allegedly. Apparently he locked her in the house until she was like, just kidding, I don't want to get a divorce anymore, and then they were good. But maybe they weren't good, and maybe that happened, and maybe it didn't happen. I don't know. So that's just something to note.
That's very interesting. But yeah, he did have, allegedly, he had alcohol problems.
Yes, that as well.
I'm just seeing Marina's screen, and I saw Gone with the Wind, and I was like, why is Gone with the Wind on Fitzgerald's page?
He wrote some unused dialogue for Gone with the Wind, for which he received no credit. Which, that's another fun fact I didn't know until you just brought it up.
Interesting. I just saw Gone with the Wind, and I was like, what the?
Yeah. But
so
yeah. So.
He has like later in life interesting facts, but the early life was kind of like, okay.
Yeah, just that he grew up pretty normal, average, upper middle class. You know, he didn't really like struggle.
And he also wrote Benjamin Button.
Yes, which we didn't know that was his short story. So yeah, that's a fun fact. Maybe that's something I'll read since I said I want to read some of his other stuff.
Yeah, well, that's exciting.
Yeah, okay.
That's basically all of it. So now we can jump into the plot.
Yes. Okay. So let's go ahead and jump right in.
So you can add, obviously, but I was just going to say it starts with, and I kind of have it in that section here on my book, that we get Nick kind of talking to himself or just like kind of writing.
Yeah, so Nick is actually like the narrator of the story.
Nick is the main character. Well, you could argue whether he is or not, but he is the narrator.
Yeah, I would say he's the main character.
Yeah, everything's through his point of view, which we will talk about. But it opens up with like Nick, and I don't think you realize it's Nick at first. It's like talking. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not like, hi, I'm Nick. Like in the Percy Jackson series. I know he doesn't say that, but it's like, I'm Percy.
Yeah.
Anyways.
He introduces himself pretty quickly, though.
Oh, he does? I always get proven wrong in this.
No, you're not wrong, but...
You're right. Also, I feel like there's going to be like bingo of how many times one of us mentions Percy Jackson in an episode. Can't wait till we do those. But no, yeah, so it's Nick just kind of like talking, and then he's like, I'm going to tell this story about this guy named Gatsby.
Yeah.
But that section I think is also why it took me a second, because it's like a denser section than others. It's not like specifically interesting story. It's just like talking.
Yeah, he does kind of set up the story. He sets it up very well, but he sets it up for a while.
Yeah, he sets it up for a while, which is something I noticed like in a lot of these older books, which like I've said this before, but it isn't the thing to do anymore in writing. Like now they're like, get to the point, be short, be catchy.
It
and
is
now
weird
it's like,
because we always read these books, like these classics and stuff. But if we were to write like this kind of now,
our teachers
would be like, no, you have to do the thing where you show, like, don't tell, which you talked about like last time, and I was like, oh, what's that? And I never realized that that was what they meant.
Yeah. Or just like don't spend so long on exposition and like.
Yes. I feel like, okay, exposition, if you contrast today's writing versus like all of the books that we regard as like older classics, because I do feel like we do have more modern classics now that we've started to read, and teachers have like slowly started to put in curriculums, but like, you know, like Gatsby or like Hemingway or
Hemingway is probably not the best example, only because he is known for being a very like short writer.
I don't think that.
Really?
Not his exposition is like the worst one.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah. Maybe I just am thinking of one specific book that I hate. But anyways, we'll talk about Hemingway when we get there.
Yeah, we should do Hemingway. I actually like Hemingway's writing.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking of the book we read in senior year. It's,
I've read like the short stories more.
Okay.
So
I would read his short stories because they're short.
Yeah. There's one that was good that it's like Clouds of White Elephants or something. Everyone go check that out. Anyways, back to F. Scott Fitzgerald and The Great Gatsby.
But yeah, like the way of writing exposition versus, I don't know, kind of telling story through a plot, I feel like is
or a lot of dialogue
of what we do now. And writing dialogue, which is like such a, I don't know, like that's a new thing, I feel like, versus all the old books, dialogue is not as important.
Which ironically I prefer writing, like as a writer, I love writing dialogue compared to exposition. Like, it sucks writing exposition.
Yeah, it does. It's a lot.
I think also I wonder too if like the switch to movies has done it. Because if you think about it, like that's how script writing is, and that's a lot of the stuff that we consume now is...
Yeah, I think to match the audience of today, it has to be more dialogue heavy versus like exposition heavy. But yeah, that's just something I guess that we are proposing, our hypothesis of today's writing.
But something I was going to say about this section, I'll touch on more. I think a lot of this first section really shows that Nick is an unreliable narrator, which we love to see because it's messy.
We love a first-person unreliable narrator.
We love it. Pretty much every first-person narrator is unreliable, but Nick is like, if someone's going to talk about like, what's an unreliable novel? It's like The Great Gatsby. Specifically, I'm going to bring up that one quote from that terrible movie. The movie After.
Oh,
she knows exactly what I'm saying. I sent her like a thing about it when I watched it. They say in it like, it's all a lie, and I remember thinking that was so dumb. Like, it's not all a lie, because I thought they meant one big lie, like just a dream he had or some shit like that. And now I'm like,
Gatsby is kind of lying. Yeah.
Like I knew it was, and then as I read it again, I was like,
it's just like when a bad actor is screaming, Gatsby is a lie. And then you're like, wait, no, it's not.
Just like a bad
and then you're like, okay, wait, I get what you were meaning there.
Yeah. So sorry, After we just. Yeah, not sorry. Anyways, but yeah, he's not a very reliable narrator, and Marina will talk about some of the reasons why too, also.
Yeah.
But
some of his contradictions.
Yeah, he tends to contradict himself. Like, I'll just say one of the things real quick is I have my little bookie. In the beginning, he boasts about having a great tolerance, and then he immediately talks about but it has its limits. And he talks about all the ways he doesn't have a good tolerance. And it's like, you can't spend a full page talking about how calm you are just to be like, I am not. And then he makes a big point of saying, like, only Gatsby does this. And it's like, okay, you kind of like realize if someone ever says only or never, such definitive words, it's kind of like,
yes, it's a red flag. As a reader, that should like give you a little alarm in your head.
And I hate that I think of also like when you take regular tests and they're like, if you ever see the word never, it's incorrect. And I'm like, no. But anyway, same thing with reading. So yeah, that's how it starts.
Yeah. Okay, so we kind of
circling
just get
back.
yeah, we get like Nick introducing himself in the story and kind of telling us what he's going to talk about, which is like the story of Gatsby and how he came to be intertwined with Gatsby and how his narrative like revolves around him.
Yeah, which starts by Nick deciding he wants to get into the Bond business, as he says it.
Yes, and he wants to go east.
Yeah.
He wants to go to New York.
Which is odd, because he's from Chicago.
Yes.
Or, like, around the Chicago area, the Midwest.
Yeah, he's from, the Midwest, and then he's like, just kidding, I love the East. Let's go to New York. Which has just been a trope forever, I guess. That I mean, I guess it makes sense, because New York was always, like, an up-and-coming city, and then now it just is the city, so...
But ironically, is the opposites of good, which we'll talk about more, because the whole idea of the American dream, which this entire book is basically about on like a top level, is the American dream, which is going east to west, and he goes from the Midwest to the east. Oh. Dun dun dun! And I think all the characters actually do.
Yeah.
Except for maybe Jordan. I don't know if we've said where Jordan's from, but
that's a great question.
Definitely at least like Gatsby, Tom, and Daisy. Yeah.
They maybe do, but I cannot recall exactly. But yeah, everybody else we know where they come from. So then it kind of just describes like where he moves. So he moves like to Long Island in New York, and there's the eggs.
The eggs.
So there's West Egg and there's East Egg. So he moves to West Egg, and his neighbor is actually Gatsby himself.
Ooh, and West Egg is the nouveau riche. Love saying that because it sounds fancy, but it's the new rich.
Yeah, so that's like the, like up and coming area, like I just said.
Yeah.
Versus like the East Egg, which is like very well established, like old money. Yeah.
Snobby.
Classic, yes, all those big houses and stuff.
Which is where like our book kind of goes to next, because Nick goes to visit his second cousin, Daisy, and her husband, Tom, who he's not that close to. Yeah. Like...
He said that, so the way that it's kind of described is that he hasn't seen them in a long time, because then he gets there and they're like, oh my gosh, like Daisy's like, I haven't seen you in so long. You didn't even come to our wedding. And he was like, well, I was in the war. Yeah. So yeah, he was in the war. So this was World War I.
Like most of the men, Gatsby included.
Yes. So they do mention it quite a bit. But yeah, so that was in like... I shouldn't have tried to say the year. Anyways, that was before 1920, and then they were in the war. So they were in the war. He was in the war, and that's why he missed their wedding. So sorry, Daisy and Tom. But
how dare you, Stacey?
But yeah, so she kind of mentions that like, we're not even that close because you like missed our wedding, and then he's like, well, I was like away in a different country, and she's like, oh, okay, and you kind of just get that, I don't know, like that interaction. That's like one of the first in the novel, and you kind of just get their relationship off of that. I feel like that's like a very good way to show that, like, we'll keep going into Daisy's character, but I feel like that kind of shows like her pretend ditziness that she kind of likes to portray,
and also how self-centered she is, because she's like, really, you had to go to war, you couldn't be at my wedding.
Like I can't imagine that anything else would be more pressing. Like even if he wasn't in a war, there's like 500 reasons to miss a wedding. But she was like,
especially during that time.
You can't even, like, text somebody last minute, like, hey, I can't come.
But in that area, we also just kind of learn, like, as we were already kind of saying, Daisy's blah, like, not that great of a person, and Tom is probably one of the worst characters.
And so Nick actually knows Tom.
From Yale.
From college. So he actually knows, like, Daisy and Tom, so that's where he, like, gets his little, like, introductions from. And they kind of, like, I guess, show him around town and stuff. Yeah. But anyway, so when he first has like the introductions with them, he describes Tom very elaborately. Mentions his muscles quite a few times.
Wrapping around him, and
yes. That was very noted
Yeah.
by him.
Like a few
And he
times, I feel
also
like.
does, concerningly, describe Daisy in a weird way for someone
for
talking
a
about their
cousin.
second cousin. It's a little bit uncomfortable. I mean, the part when he talks about her voice sounding pretty is like fine, but he does.
He just does it too many times for comfort. And I feel like I remember thinking that in high
slightly
school.
flirtatious.
Yeah,
which is weird.
Which like now I wish I would have googled like, was it normal to flirt with your second cousins in the 1920s? But
I feel like it was.
Yeah, I almost don't want to see that answer.
Yeah.
Because that's deeply disturbing.
Oh yeah, but the interesting thing to know about that is what I was saying is that it is brought up quite a few times. By Nick, just that Daisy's voice has like a weird charm to it, almost like it's like magic or sounds like a song.
Yeah.
Or like the cadence of her voice kind of just like entraps you, like you don't really know where it's going, but you're following it to like every beat. Is kind of how he describes it.
There was something else too that I caught here that I want to bring up, where we were kind of talking about her having a fake ditziness, but also just, I don't know if this is either the fake ditziness and her just being a fake person, or him having the perception of like not, I know he like describes her nicely when it comes to her looks, but I feel like when it comes to her mind and her behavior, it's different, because he says,
that's true.
She laughed again as if she said something very witty. And I don't know why, like, the as if feels like, it wasn't like she actually said something witty. It's like him going, she's not funny and she thinks she is. Like, that's how I read it.
Yeah. That is true. He kind of does describe her in that way.
So he doesn't give her, like, I know, like, he flirts because she's pretty and she sounds pretty. But then personality-wise, he kind of, like...
Yeah, he's like,
almost undermines her. So,
yeah, that's true.
But then when he describes Gatsby and Tom, it's like, nice.
Here's this
at least
manly
Gatsby.
Man with so much muscles.
Yeah, Tom had a really long explanation. I remember being like, how much more?
It's just like, how many ways can you describe a man's muscles? I feel like I've never used that many words to do that. But anyways, in this first like meeting, we do also get, so Daisy and Tom actually do have a child, a little girl. And
mentioned like twice.
Yes, literally twice in the whole novel. I'm like 99% sure it's twice. So it's very in this beginning part, and then later when you actually meet the kid for like 5 seconds.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in this first part, Nick like asks like, oh, like how is your daughter? Like, you know, I've never met her or whatever. And so Daisy kind of tells him about like when she gave birth and everything, and then they were asking like the gender of the child, and then like the nurse told her like, oh, it's a girl, and then she said the famous quote, which I feel like every English teacher has definitely explained to you if you've ever read this book in school.
And made the movie.
Which is, I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world. A beautiful little fool. So, we kind of had like a mini discussion about this like before we started, but just that quote is very, I don't know, it's very telling of Daisy's character.
Yeah.
Like right off the bat, which is why I think it's important and why I think that Fitzgerald chose to like include it in the very beginning. Because it does seem like kind of like out of left field, and it's just like, oh, and your daughter, your child, and then she has this kind of like.
Also, that quote was just out of left field. Like she wasn't just like, she's good. It's like,
yeah,
she's a fool.
Yeah, and like she has to tell him the whole story of like, oh, and this is what I said when she was born.
And where was Tom? Off somewhere with God knows who.
Yeah, she does say that as well.
He probably was.
So she kind of describes that. It kind of is just telling of like how Daisy feels about her life and where she is. Just that she is trying to, I don't know, turn her brain off to have a more better life. To have a better life. But yeah, so it's kind of just like, you know, everybody, I guess in the 1920s especially, like the whole novel is kind of all about like that pleasure seeking thing. Where like they're always indulging in like drinking and then different vices and things, and so they're always partying, they're always going out. Like everybody in this is like super rich. Daisy's always been super rich, like she's never had like a problem in her life. So I feel like she's kind of just, she's just there for the ride. And even if she sometimes has those thoughts of like, should I be doing something else, because all I've ever been is this ditzy person who just needs to have money to figure out what I'm doing. Like, she doesn't have the ability to be anything more than that, so she has to turn off that part of her brain that's like, maybe you should do this, or you should try something else. So.
And interestingly, this is almost verbatim something that Fitzgerald's wife, Zelda, actually said. his daughter talks about that in the foreword of this book, which is just very interesting. Fun fact. Yeah. And I personally do also like to see what authors pull from their real life.
Yeah. And that's really interesting. Yeah, that's a really weird one.
It's like, okay.
That's a little bit too telling.
I think the daughter or the granddaughter might have said something, or Fitzgerald's daughter might have said something about, like, I kind of wish my dad wasn't famous because it made life hard, so I think it also, like,
that kind of goes to that. Yeah. It's just, I don't know, that quote is just very good because it's, all about, like, conforming to things, and, like, that you can just glide through life if you're a certain way, and that so you shouldn't wish to be any other way. So it kind of does seem like Daisy's battling with her own things when she says that.
Yeah.
Almost like she has a curse of wanting something more that she knows isn't really attainable. Which we'll see, which is a little bit of foreshadowing if you break down that quote a lot before you get to continue to the rest of the novel. But yeah.
If you're actually curious of what Zelda said, it was also when she gave birth to their daughter. And it was, oh my gosh, my mind skipped to the other quote. Isn't she smart? She has the hiccups. I hope it's beautiful and a beautiful little fool. But the daughter, sorry, I read mother because it's the granddaughter writing. But their daughter was no fool. It says right here. So that sucks.
Yeah. But I guess we'll never know about Daisy's child, but... Yeah. We know that Daisy stays a fool.
Yeah.
Well, she actively chooses to remain a fool, which we'll talk about. But yeah, so that is kind of like their little introduction. That's when, Nick goes over and sees Daisy and Tom in East Egg, and then goes back to his place, West Egg, which we mentioned, like, Gatsby is his neighbor, which he doesn't know yet that's Gatsby. He just knows that he lives next to a mansion. Yeah. And it's, like, huge.
A big house.
And, so going on from there.
Yeah, the next major part is really that
wait, I didn't even mention. This is, like, that meeting is when he also met Jordan.
Oh, yes.
So Jordan Baker is also there, and Daisy introduces Nick and Jordan. And so Jordan is also, like, an important character. She's part of, like, their little group. So it's kind of... Nick, Jordan, and then Daisy and Tom. So that's, like, their little squad.
Yeah.
So Jordan is actually, like, a golfer.
Like
she's, like, pretty famous. Yeah, she's a pro golfer. And she actually, something that I didn't remember from high school was that Nick had actually, like, recognized her, and he was like, I don't know where I recognize her face from. And then later he realizes it's because he had read, like, an article of her where, like, there was a scandal that she had, like, moved her ball in a competition. But yeah, so she had actually, like, moved a ball in the competition, and so then, like, the people who said it ended up, like, retracting their statements, so she got away with it if she did it, which I 100% believe that she did it. I would talk about her, like, a lot
especially with her driving.
Yeah, she's just
reckless.
She's a messy person, and I love her for that, and it's so funny. But yeah, so she's famous for golfing, and maybe she had a scandal, maybe she didn't.
I think you described it well too. Like, she's a mess, but she's not a detriment to the other characters' lives.
Yes. So she's, like, just as terrible as a person, as we'll talk about everybody is, but she doesn't do anything that harms, like, other people.
Yeah.
She's kind of just messy in her own life.
Daisy and Tom definitely do. But what I was saying, now that we know Jordan, the next major point is we know Gatsby throws these huge parties, and Nick gets an invite from Gatsby to go to the party, so he does. And that's when we finally meet Gatsby.
Also, another thing we forgot, because we're really good at forgetting things. Right before then, we also, like, when he's having the meeting with everybody, Tom gets a phone call, and then they talk about how he's having an affair.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that one's good to know he's having an affair.
That's important. That is important to the book.
And that's also another thing they show with how Tom's not a great person.
Yes.
Aside from being racist.
Yeah.
And
that also happens.
That one's just, like, sprinkled in there of, like, talking about really the white race being the best. And it's just like,
And it's so weird that I didn't realize, like, the first time I read this, but, like, how much, there's a few times when Tom is like, yes, science, that is the answer. And it's, like, him being racist or him being, I don't know, weird. He uses science to justify some weird shit.
And I feel like in the book, I couldn't tell if Daisy was sarcastically making fun of him, but in the movie, they definitely portrayed it that way.
In the book, it's her being like,
he's very profound.
Which, like, I don't doubt that, like, you know, she wasn't... I don't think that she was actively racist or anti-racist. I think she was just profiting off of white privilege and didn't care to know anything else.
I would say, if anything, it's not so much that she disagrees with him, it's more that she's like, why not just party and have fun? Why do you have to think about this stuff?
Yes. Like, so she's that person who's like, why do we have to care about politics? But she's like white and rich.
Yeah,
so in the 20s.
But yeah, so we finally get to see one of Gatsby's parties.
Yes.
Which are famous.
Very elaborate, lavish parties.
And Nick discusses he's the only one that gets an invite.
Yeah, so he kind of describes it as like, he doesn't think that anybody's been invited. Everybody just kind of shows up, because once he's there, he kind of asks like, oh, like, where can I find Gatsby? And like, most people that he talks to, they're like, I don't know Gatsby. I've never seen him before. And yeah, so a lot of people who go to the parties, they just show up.
Yeah.
So he kind of just throws these parties to like bring all these people there.
And we'll learn why.
Yes. So they're very lavish. Like, Nick describes like tons of cars coming up and being parked outside. So he goes and he sees Jordan there, so he ends up just kind of attaching himself to her. You know, when you're awkward at a party and you need somebody to stand next to because you don't want to be by yourself.
Honestly, kudos to him even showing up by himself.
I know, I would never go to a party alone. God.
Always need a friend.
Yes. So he finds Jordan, and Jordan kind of like took a liking to Nick as well. So she kind of like, you know, entertains him and hangs out with him. And they talk to a few other people, you know, asking about Gatsby and things.
All these rumors about him.
Yes, so they hear a few rumors, and a lot of people who don't know him at all like to be like, oh, well, I've heard that he's killed a man.
Yeah.
And
he's not even real. This is all fake.
Yes, there's tons of weird things that people say about him. And Nick kind of describes this like, oh, that's weird that they don't know who he is, but they're like talking about him
all the time too.
So he does that kind of where he says like, I'm such an honest man. That's kind of, you know, him bragging about that, being like, I would never talk about somebody if I didn't know them.
That brings up something else I was going to say about Nick, because we're popping around as always.
Of course.
I feel like he has to make a point that he's smart.
Yes, he does a lot.
Literally on page 4, he makes sure to bring up Midas and Morgan and something I cannot pronounce. But he's like mentioning old history things, and I literally wrote, has to show he's smart. Like one of those people has to be like, hey, I know this story. I can compare my life to this. So yeah.
But yeah, so he does do that a little bit when he's talking about, especially the party scenes, I feel like.
Yeah, he tries to act above everyone else, which like maybe he is, but he makes a point to do it, which that in itself is kind of like, no one who is that above acts like that.
Yeah.
So.
And I will say here, because I'm not sure if this is the right place to stick this in, but something that I'm very passionate about in this novel. But Nick, in his writing, this was one of my favorite things that I didn't notice until I actually listened to the audiobook. Like, I might have highlighted a few quotes here and there, but I guess it didn't really hit me until I was listening to someone say these words. But a lot of the writing is very oxymoronic in the book. Like, his narrations are. So he kind of just contradicts himself, like, right away in a lot of things that he says. So the party made me think of it, because I'm not sure if it's this party or if it's, like, later. But there is, like, a party where Jordan says like, oh, I like large parties, they're so intimate, and like, I don't know, that just really hit me, and I was like, whoa, okay. So obviously both of those statements like can't be true, but then also I was thinking about it, because then right after that I think what she says is kind of like, oh, you can never truly be alone if it's like a small gathering, and I'm like, okay, that's also true. So I don't know, like, that's very interesting. He also does it like when I think he's describing Gatsby at one point. Yeah, like he describes Gatsby here in a second when we're going to meet him, that he's like elegant, but he's also roughneck. So he kind of just bounces back and forth, which like makes for very good writing and very good reading. And reading it is very like pleasant to hear, but then when you think about it in terms of like how unreliable he is as a person,
like if you were telling me this story, I'd be like, all right,
you'd be like, okay, so what? Like, I can't get a good picture on what this person is if he's both of these things.
And it just makes you think, okay, then what else isn't true? Which is why he's so unreliable, because then he has a bias. Like we said, he openly kind of shows he isn't sure if he thinks Daisy's smart, and like he kind of over explains Tom's appearance And we'll see with Gatsby, it's just like so much praise. So you already know right off the bat, like no matter what's gonna happen, he's gonna side with Gatsby and like so it's very biased.
But yeah,
literally for the rest of his life, he's like, oh, Gatsby, so he has to write this book.
But yeah, okay.
But yeah, we meet Gatsby at this party, as we were saying.
We do.
Very important. He's excited to meet Nick.
Yeah, and he meets him without realizing he's met him.
He's like talking about him to him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because then he mentions like, oh, like about Gatsby and blah blah blah, and then he's like, Gatsby kind of looks at him for a second. And he's like, well, I am Gatsby. He's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, and he says old sport, I believe, for the first time. I actually think he does say that, like, well, I'm Gatsby, old sport, like something like that. I'm pretty sure.
I love the jokes that are like, he just doesn't know Nick's name.
Those are so funny. It's like when it's too awkward to ask somebody you met for their name, so you just have to keep going with it.
At this point, your name's just old sport.
Yes.
But I can't help but say it with like the weird accent that Leonardo DiCaprio does. Old sport. I'm doing it so wrong.
There's not another way to say it though. No. You have to at least be pretending
old
you're
sport.
saying it with
so boring.
In that weird way that they talked in like the 1920s when they're like everything is so animated and like it's the bee's knees.
That like I think about that like so much. I feel like
it's not an accent, so why did they talk like that?
This is getting me off on like a tangent now. Because when you watch like old media, like not the 20s, but like older media, and they sound so weird. I'm like, is that their voice? And now I'm like, okay, no, I know it's like the audio they had wasn't as good, so it was kind of messing with their voice. But for years I was like, they sound so weird. What's happened?
Like aliens.
And I think they did go to like classes, like actors do this now still, but like of how to sound on TV, but they don't do that weird voice now.
Yes.
But still, it does have an extra weirdness because the audio.
It was so weird. I don't know, because just I feel like when you think of like that, you do think of like people like bouncing around, like
yeah. And this sounds random, but like this is what the Gatsby movie is kind of like.
Yeah, that's true.
Very like
all over the place. But that's probably because they're so drunk all the time.
They are.
They're always drinking.
I love in the movie too where the girl's like, I get high on life, or just like she's like, I'm happy with nothing at all, and then she takes a whole bunch of pills, and you're just like, okay.
Like, oh, okay. So even back then they were popping a Xanny.
Oh, forever. I just love her, like, I don't do anything. Swallows all the pills.
Oh my god.
Like, how dare you guys drink?
They just drink so much that it stresses me out.
It does.
Like, I can't think about drinking that much now, and they're like a little bit older than us. Like, close to being like in their 30s. Like their late 20s. And so
I actually wonder how old they are, because like back then you'd have kids early, and if she has a toddler.
Well, yeah, but we know Nick's age because
that's right, Nick's 30.
His birthday. Oh. But yeah, so we can just assume they're all in the same area. So like they're late 20s, and I'm just thinking about now, me as a 25-year-old, and I'm like, if I was drinking that much, I would just be dead. I feel like I need to have like 10 bottles of water a day. And be very hydrated all the time, or I will explode.
I'm wondering if that shows too just how old or how rich Nick's family is, because like 29 and just starting your career in the 20s seems like. I know he went to war for a while, but was he at war literally from like 18 to 28?
Oh, that's a good point. Well, they did say that he lived back home for a while, right?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So he had the means to be able to just like live.
Yeah, so like, he's like the poor one out of their group.
Yeah, but he probably
he's still pretty privileged. Like he's like, I mean, he still has like a maid who cooks him dinner.
I know. I thought that was so interesting because that's.
And they mentioned like his house is small, but then they mentioned that, and I'm like, okay, but in context of him describing his house as small compared to Gatsby's mansion, what does small mean to him?
I noticed in the movie he didn't have a maid. Like they made him look poor. And it's like no.
He had a maid who was like Finnish or something. He calls her like the Finn or something, which is weird.
Very dehumanizing.
Yeah. She literally makes him dinner. Like I don't think he knows how to cook.
No man from the 20s knows how to cook.
No, they don't. None of them cook ever.
No.
They literally just have dinner all the time, and I have a weird notification.
Trying to ignore it, instead my eyes just like widen and stare at the computer. I'm very bad at the whole like stay focused.
But yeah,
we are very off track.
We are a little bit off track, but it's okay.
We bounce.
Yes. So after this, there is a time when Tom and Nick are hanging out. And then Tom tells Nick he wants to take him into town because he wants him to meet his girl, who is the mistress.
Yeah. Who called?
Yes. Who we will find.
Myrtle.
Yes. Her name is Myrtle. murder. A spoiler.
Myrtle. It's like
It's
a tongue
Myrtle.
twister.
Yes. So her name is Myrtle. Myrtle, I don't know why Myrtle's a funny name to me. But when Wilson is her last name, so sometimes she's referred to as Miss Wilson. But when Nick finds out that her name is Myrtle, because they all get drunk together, then they stay on a first name basis. So at first he's calling her Miss Wilson or whatever.
Weird.
But so they meet, and then they actually go to the garage where like her husband works, so Mr. Wilson.
Because he gets his cars fixed from him.
Yes.
Tom does.
So then Tom like kind of calls her down from upstairs, and they're like, oh, we'll take her into town. And then Mr. Wilson is like, okie dokie. I feel so bad for Mr. Wilson. But anyways, he kind of doesn't know anything is happening, and she just gets in the car. Nick describes her in a weird way. Again, I made note of this in my head, because he describes her in a way that's like a man who's trying not to be like fat shamey, but is being fat shamey, which I'm sure that she was like a perfectly fine woman. Yeah. But I don't know, it's so weird the way he describes her. Like, he describes her as like, oh, like the woman who has like extra body but knows how to like handle it. Like, that's kind of how he says it, and I don't know the exact quote, but it's something really weird like that.
I don't like that.
Yeah, so he mentions it like, oh, she has like a great figure, but because she knows how to like use it or whatever. But it's really creepy, and it comes off as like, I don't know, a gross man quote. But yeah, so he mentions that.
When those quotes have been used throughout the ages.
Yeah.
From 1920 to 2020.
Yes. You can just say someone looks nice. You don't have to say anything else.
You look good for being thick. What?
He was trying to call her thick, but didn't know the words. We didn't have the words until 2020.
I hate that.
But yeah, so we continue on.
He's also getting to know Gatsby at this time.
Yes.
Nick
so
is. Gatsby's taking an interest in hanging out with him.
Yeah, so he kind of did invite him to like get on his plane with him, like after the party. His hydroplane. Oh
yes, I was like, what?
But yeah, so he invites him to little things, and he's kind of getting to know Gatsby, so he's kind of friendly with him. At this point, when he's hanging out with Tom and Myrtle. So they drive into New York, and then they like into the city, and they have like a mini, not like a party, it's like a little get together.
Like a lunch party.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's Myrtle and then Tom and Nick.
Oh my god, I thought you were talking about Gatsby, and I was like, what?
No, this is not that time.
Okay, because we were talking about Gatsby, and then suddenly I was like,
no. So
Myrtle was there. And
then there's two other characters who aren't important. There's like a photographer guy.
Yeah.
And then his wife.
Yeah.
Who I don't remember her name, but she has red hair.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's described like vividly by Nick. But so they're all hanging out, and Nick describes it as like, I've only ever been drunk twice in my life, and this was one of those times when he was really drunk.
Sounds fake.
And yeah.
When you see him drinking the whole time.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like you see him at Gatsby's parties, like, drinking.
Yeah. He does. He drinks every time.
Yeah.
So I don't know how he wouldn't be drunk.
He's not drunk, but like, come on.
But it's a little bit sketch, you know. But
be honest with us. It's the 20s. It's right after Prohibition. We know you're drinking.
We're all going at it.
We know you care.
But yeah, so he mentions that everything is kind of blurry. He describes it as like his memories of that night kind of have a haze over it, which we've all been there. But I don't know. Everything that he says, you're like, okay, first, we already don't trust you narrating anything. Secondly, you're drunk, so we extra don't trust you. But I don't know, he describes some weird things that happen. Later in the night, the photographer people, the guy, and his wife, the wife like boasts about like, oh, he's taken like 120 photos of me like since we've been married or something weird. You know, when you have to brag about cameras because cameras barely existed. But the photographer guy kept talking about like, oh, the lighting and blah blah blah. And so Tom and Myrtle are getting all up like, oh, dancing with each other, and Nick is kind of just observing from afar because he's like, oh, you know, you're cheating on my cousin, that's cool. And he's just sitting in a chair getting drunk. And then tensions rise, and Myrtle kind of mentions Daisy, I believe at some point. And that kind of makes Tom get really upset for some reason, even though he's the one cheating on Daisy, but whatever. And he keeps being like, oh, you can't like say my wife's name. And she's like, well, I'll say whatever I want. And then he kind of punches her in the nose. Maybe not punched. I think he's described as open-handed, but like literally really right in the nose.
Slap her,
and so her nose like explodes into blood, and she's bleeding all over the place. And that's kind of like one of the last scenes that Nick describes.
That's Tom.
Yeah. Woo! We love the worst character in the novel. He gets that stamp of approval. He's the worst, I think. Everybody's pretty shit, but I would say he's the worst.
Tom's the worst.
Yeah, that's what happens when you spew racist theories over dinner and then you hit your mistress in the face. But yeah, and that you have a mistress in the first place. Anyways, so after that, Nick is super drunk, and this is the part when I guess we could kind of go into like the whole, do we think that Nick is attracted to men question?
Mm-hmm.
Because, and my favorite part about this is that I probably would have never noticed this as a high schooler, but my teacher pointed it out to us, which is my favorite thing ever. That's the photographer guy. And Nick kind of like goes with him, and then they talk about like being in the elevator, and then he's like in that guy's like apartment, which I don't know what happened to the wife. Like, I feel like that didn't get described, or maybe I'm just not recalling, but like I read it and I listened to it, but Nick didn't care. But it just describes him clad in his underwear at his bed. So, you know, there's a lot of reader interpretation. You gotta do some heavy lifting here. But that's just like a weird detail to leave in if it doesn't mean anything.
There are other things too, like the way he describes Tom is like like his riding clothes could hide the enormous power of his body. Or like, no, it couldn't. And it was just like talking about his body, his voice, how gruff and husky he was.
Yes.
And like spending a long time describing him.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens with Gatsby. Like we said, it's just constant.
He describes Gatsby's like smile like a lot.
Yeah.
Which is like, you know, you're allowed to notice a smile, but I feel like if we're reading in context of what we're looking for, then maybe that's like means something else.
People have also pointed out, like, at least I also noticed too, like the way Jordan's described is very like broad and strong and all this stuff, and then that's the woman he's like most attracted to in the book.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, she was slender, small-breasted.
Yeah, and he describes her being like pretty masculine.
Yeah.
There is a moment when I'm not
like
sure
a young
exactly
cadet.
when. Yeah, but she's wearing a dress, and he says she wears her dresses like sports clothing.
Yeah.
So that is also like, you know, traditionally masculine. You know, we all know it doesn't matter now, but you know.
For the 20s. But yeah, that's something I thought was interesting. I was reading Jordan's description. It's like, so the woman you love the most, the thing you like is that she holds her shoulders like a young cadet, which at the time was obviously all men.
Yes.
So yeah, Nick just has those subtleties going on, and that's just on page 11.
Yeah.
So yeah. And like Marina said, it could be possible too, since there's rumors about that with the author himself. So it's definitely something that's probably been thought about in his own life.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Like maybe that is something that he put in because it's something like in his life that maybe wasn't like the main thing in his life, because I mean obviously we don't know with like the whole maybe locking his wife in the house thing, but like it did seem like him and his wife, like, you know, he did care about his wife, like he was in love with her and all that. So, you know, it could have been like this was another part of himself that he didn't really know what to do with, and that maybe he was also interested in men. We don't know if he like, he could have liked men and women. So we don't know. Maybe he's writing that into the novel.
And we do know, like we said before, he pulls from real life experience, since he almost verbatim quoted his wife at childbirth. So,
you know, so maybe he's kind of just sneaking that in. And maybe it was also subconscious. We don't know. We can't ask him. So that's our best guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, so.
I remember, and this was something I didn't pick up on when I was in high school forever ago, and then I've read things about it. I'm like, interesting. Like, I'll have to read it and see. And then when reading it, I was like, yeah, I see it. Just even like the subtleties.
Super funny. Like I said, I think my teacher just wanted to stir the pot when she said that in high school, which was so funny because when
high schools,
because obviously it was 2013, 2014. I was on Tumblr, so I went into Gatsby knowing that it was gonna be pretty gay. Yeah. But I was like, okay, yeah, like, you know, I have that idea in my head. But then my teacher brought it up, and I feel like people were just like shook, and they were like, oh my gosh, I never even thought about that part when he's with that guy in his apartment.
I feel like I remember that part, yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I thought that was just really funny, because I feel like, you know, there's some teachers who are like shitty about it.
Would never say it.
Yeah.
Cool teacher.
But yeah, so that's just something to think about. The authors do often include parts of their own life or like inspiration from their own life in the novel. And even if it's through like symbolism or something else, but that's just something to think about. So when somebody says that to you next time, then you can be like, oh, I can see that because did you know this about F. Scott Fitzgerald? but
yeah, so I think the next major plot point is after Gatsby and Nick hang out for a bit, Gatsby comes out and tells Nick, hey, I actually am interested in talking to you and all this stuff because I used to love
he tells that to Jordan. He gets Jordan to come to the... He, like, calls Jordan and is like, hey,
but
Jordan,
then he talks to him about it further, doesn't he?
So what happens... Yeah, so what happens first is that...
I was just cutting it short.
Yes, it's okay.
We're close on time.
But Jordan is called by Gatsby, and then Jordan is like, oh, I can't tell you until, like, tomorrow, Nick, or whatever. And so Nick is like, what are you talking about? And then eventually she tells Nick, like, oh, Gatsby has asked me to ask you to ask Daisy to have tea. So kind of like through the grapevine. Yeah. Kind of, it's still the same gossipy kind of shit that happens today, you know? He's like, oh, well, I heard that you know this person and I need you to do this. And so he finds out that Nick is his neighbor, essentially. And so he wants Nick to invite Daisy to have tea so that Gatsby can just show up and be like, hey, neighbor. And then, oh, hello, Daisy. And had no idea you would be here. Yeah. And they can have some sort of reunion because it seems as though Gatsby knows Daisy from somewhere. Yeah, I know you're kind of hinting at it, but he kind of talks about how they knew each other before Gatsby went off to the war, and Gatsby talks about it as like... And before Daisy got married. Yes, before Daisy married Tom, and how they were super in love, and Gatsby was like, we were definitely going to get married, but because I was gone, she just didn't know, and like, that's Gatsby's point of view of what happened. Yes. So now he's back, trying to woo her, bought the house probably to see Daisy. Yes. The green light. Yeah, so he lives, like we said, he's directly across West Egg, next to Nick. And across the water, he can see the end of the dock where, like, Daisy's mansion is. And at the end of the dock, there's a green light. And so he uses that to be like, oh, there's Daisy. I can see her. She's tangible now. Hugh Lord. I'm waiting for it. But anyways, so at that point, the tea does occur. And Nick does invite Daisy and Gatsby to come over for tea. And they reunite. Yes. Don't know why I have to, like, show it in hand motions, but... That is reuniting, yes. It is. But they hold hands. It is, it's super weird, because then Nick is like, do you want me here? And they're like, yes, of course. But, yeah, so they kind of meet up there, and then Daisy's like, oh, wow, Gatsby. And... So to make it seem like kosher, you know, like, we're just all hanging out. And so it was like at that point that she kind of connected the dots because Jordan had mentioned like she was going to a Gatsby party, but like, Daisy had never like put the two together. Like, that's my Gatsby from when we were a thing back in the day, in Louisville, I believe, where they were from. So she didn't know until he was there, and then she's like shocked. But then Gatsby invites them all to go to his mansion, so it's all going according to plan. And he brings them all there, and he kind of shows everything off to Daisy, and she's just like in awe. And they're like you said, they're like holding hands, kind of like being really those weird like flirty, giggly people in front of somebody. And there is like a few times when Nick is like, "Should I go? Like, do you want me to be here?" And they're like, "Oh no, like stay." And he kind of describes it like, oh, as if it was like okay only because he was there. Yeah, exactly. Like they're not breaking any rules because of that. And so at the end of like this interaction is when we get the famous scene with the shirts. Yeah. Yeah. So which then is in the movie. Yes. And thinking of Leo just like tossing all these shirts. Yeah, so Gatsby kind of is just showing off to Daisy. Which makes like, sense if you know Daisy. Yes. That's the best way to get to Daisy. Yeah, so he's showing off all the shirts he has, nice shirts, and he's like, she's loving these shirts and these beautiful shirts and all of these, and he's like just drowning her in the shirts, and she's just kind of like living for it. And it's her dream. She starts crying. And I think that's like a famous quote, but yeah, I don't have that one pulled up, but so she starts crying, and then they're like, oh, what's wrong? And she's like, I've never seen such beautiful shirts. And that's literally like how the chapter ends. So if we want to like pull that apart a little bit, Daisy's just losing it, I feel like. Yeah, I would say she's not a very like stable person.
I would say too, like, the book leaves it more open to interpretation what it means, but again, like, thinking of the movie, they definitely show on her face that something else is going on.
Yeah.
So they did their own interpreting for the movie too.
That's cool.
Because I feel like she's like,
that well.
I could be remembering it wrong, but I feel like she was like, "Oh, these shirts, you know, it's the shirts that's making me cry," and it's like, is it? But
yeah,
trying to be a fool.
Yeah, that's the way that I kind of took it. Like, if you're tying it back into her first really big quote with the whole fool thing, it's kind of just her being like, I don't know, overwhelmed by, like, that's what she's chosen for her life. Like, the only thing that can bring her happiness is all of that. But then she's like, does this really make me happy? Now I'm crying because I've never seen so many beautiful shirts. But
so yeah, basically the next section, and Maria can add more if she wants, but there's like them hanging out a bunch, and Nick is always there. And if you have us on social media, all I can think of is the Brooklyn Nine-Nine meme where like Captain Holt's there and like stalking them.
Yeah, kind of
that's
just
basically
like
Nick
looking over the relationship.
Like, he's always there.
And it's funny too, because like, so when we're at this point in the novel, it's like pretty far, and there's only been like those two instances. Like, he describes like Gatsby's party and then like the time when they reunite, and then like that's it. And he's like, oh, like that wasn't like my whole entire life. Like, you might think it is because that's all I've told you and all we do is drink and blah blah blah, but also like I did this and I went to work and I still did my bond job and I saw Jordan some and we hung out and blah blah blah. But that's not really the point, and I think maybe he knows that, and we know that, because the point is about Gatsby. And how Nick is kind of just like, I don't even know if like, because I know we're like, oh, like he could have been like in love with Gatsby, he was at least infatuated, but he was infatuated with Gatsby. Like, you can't deny that.
Romantic or not.
Yeah, like it's romantic or not, but just like he was infatuated with Gatsby, and just like the idea of him.
Which I just realized is kind of interesting, because I feel like he looks down on Daisy for being so into him for those money reasons, but it's like, okay, but why were you into him?
Yes, like he was just...
that's all he was, so...
Yeah, like he was put under a spell. Like, there was times when, you know, how we talked about earlier, like how there's all those rumors about Gatsby? And Nick was like, oh, well, when Gatsby told me he went to Oxford, I, like, didn't believe him. But then he's like, oh, and this is when I went there. And Nick's like, oh, well, then I definitely believed him. And I believed everything else he said after that forever. So, I don't know. He has him under, like, a little spell, I would say.
And who doesn't Leonardo DiCaprio have under a spell? I mean, just kidding.
Not kidding, but...
if this was, like, 4 years ago, I wouldn't be kidding. No, I am.
That's true.
That was a joke for high school me.
Yeah, at High School Monica.
No, I'm too old.
But, okay.
Too old. I have one more year.
One more prime Leo year. But, so, after all of this, and he kind of says, like, oh, I do all these other things, too, so I don't think I just do partying, which, like, okay, sure. But it kind of all gathers into, like, the epicenter of the novel. It's very hot. It's the summertime. Which
in Topeka.
It's hot.
So sorry.
But it...
When I only
I can relate. I was going to say, when they describe that and then they're like in New York, I'm just like, wow, it's hot in Florida.
I was going to say, I don't want to be that person that's always like, well, it's worse here. Sometimes when other places are like, it's hot, I'm like, okay, but you don't have humidity.
Yes. Okay, so I have been, when I did go to New York, it was in the summer, and it could be hot.
I went during a heat wave.
But humidity is a bitch. And so if you're a Floridian like us, you know that other places can't complain about heat as much as we can. So when they're complaining about the heat, there's a part that I like just really needed to talk about because I felt it in my soul, where it said like it looked like Daisy was on the verge of tears when she was complaining how hot it is. I feel like that's me every summer. I'm the only one
year round. Oh my god.
I don't appreciate the heat. I hate it. I wish it would go away.
Marina gets very upset when we're all
just
hanging
get
out.
angry.
Like, it's too cold outside, and she's like, shut up.
Yes. Sweating is the worst. They talk about sweat so much in this, it made me uncomfortable. And they're like, oh, the sweat in her waistband. I'm like, I can feel the stickiness.
Like, picturing them sweating in the movie, and they have the ice buckets around, and it's like,
no. And it's like, okay, that's really good writing, because I could feel it.
It hurts.
It hurt me in my core.
He found our weakness.
But
it's warm in this room right now.
Yeah, so, and I don't know, also that could be kind of symbolic, that it's very hot when this happens. Everybody's blood is boiling.
Yeah.
It's all reaching a point. It's at the boiling point, if you will. So it is the summer, and they're actually all at the Buchanans, Daisy and Tom. I feel like we might have never said their last name until right now.
No, but it's not that important.
But anyways, they're at the Buchanans' house.
I think the most thing it shows is how rich they are with that last name.
So Gatsby has had, yeah, that's true. That does sound like a rich people last name. Gatsby has had like one other interaction with Tom up until this point.
At a party.
Yeah.
And Tom did not
at
like
Gatsby's
it.
party. Yeah. And he's just like, okay.
And he
called him
like,
old sport, and he got pissed off.
Yeah.
And he's about to get more pissed off.
And he was very cozy with Daisy already, and Tom was like, what the? As he goes off with like other women. But
yeah. So what happens is they end up all going there. And Gatsby is also there. And so they're all hanging out, and then they're like, oh, it's so hot, what do we do? And then Daisy's like, let's go into town. We can't just be here. We're wasting away our day. Which I thought was so funny, because she has a child. And I think this is the part when the kid comes out, but I'm not sure.
I don't know.
But I'm pretty sure it's now when she runs up to her, and like the nurse maid, who is like obviously the one raising the child, brings her out, and then she like runs up to Daisy and is like, oh, Mom, like, hi. And then Gatsby meets the kid. And so then Gatsby kind of has, like, Nick describes it, like, as a weird reaction to the child.
Yeah.
Because, like, Gatsby almost didn't believe that she had a child. Like, that was fake to him.
He still thought she was the same Gatsby from when they, same Daisy from when they first met.
Yes, like, his image of her is very stuck in when he knew her 5 years ago. And he can't move past that. So the idea of the child, I think, really freaked him out. And when he met her child, he was in over his head, which I think kind of tips off where this is about to go.
Yeah. And I also, it's important to point out, I think he wasn't hiding his emotions, and Tom could see, okay, this guy does love my wife. This is more than just
so that's what happens. Like right after the kid leaves, then they're kind of acting cuddly, and it's weird. And so then Tom is like, what the heck is going on? Like, I have eyeballs, guys. And then they're like, oh, like, you're being crazy, because Tom and Daisy love to gaslight each other. And I know that's like a term that everybody is being like, people are using this incorrectly, but this is like actually correct.
They do.
They definitely do, because she literally like holding hands and snuggling with Gatsby, and then she's like, nothing is happening. You're crazy, Tom. And he's like, hello? But yeah, anyways, Daisy kind of is like, let's go into town. We can't just waste away our days. We're like young. We need to go out and do things. And so extroverts.
No, it's like, no, it sounds terrible for me.
Gatsby has a pool. Why don't they just hang
out in the pool?
I was just thinking
that.
I mean, we'll get to the pool eventually, but why don't they do that?
I was literally thinking that as you're talking. I'm like, the city is so much hotter than like the outskirts and the nice mansions because of the buildings. Like, stay where you are, go for a swim. They're on a lake. It's not a lake in Florida, so it's not as scary, because that's another scary thing we have here.
Yeah.
Lakes are not safe.
Alligators, amoebas. Anyways. But, yes, so they go into town. They also have a weird car arrangement, because then Gatsby and Daisy drive in together, which, if you're already flirting with your affair in front of your husband, the only way, to get him to believe you would be to go drive in the car with him as well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So anyways, then
they race.
Yeah. So that leaves Tom to drive
Jordan and Nick.
So then they all get in the car and go as well. And they go into town, and then it's like a restaurant they go to or something, but they're all just hanging out, and then they kind of describe like, oh, we're gonna have drinks, and like Tom brought like some whiskey, and then they're trying to make mint juleps.
I know at some point they're at the plaza or some sort of hotel when like the big conundrum happens.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's at a hotel room
upstairs. Yeah.
I think it might be the same place where they had the little party with the weird couple.
That was like an apartment though. Somebody's
apartment. Oh, okay. But they did have, the fight was at the hotel. Yeah. So it's like a little, one of those places that rich people go when it's like, I don't know, a little private room. No, yeah. Yeah, they didn't, because there's a part when Daisy asks them to open all the windows, and they're like, there's no more windows to open, and she's like, open more windows. But anyways, so then they're trying to make some mint juleps, but then tensions get high, and they ask the waiter to bring like some ice and mints and stuff. Mint leaves for the drinks, not mints. But tensions get high, and then they kind of end up confronting each other right there. Yeah. Gatsby and Tom.
And so Tom is kind of getting mad because Gatsby keeps calling him old sport, and he's like, stop calling me old sport, like, I don't care for that. And Gatsby's like, oh, well, like, I don't care for you. And then Tom kind of is like, okay, well, he's like, get away from my wife. And then Gatsby's like, she's never loved you. And he didn't really run this by Daisy either. He's kind of just saying this in his own, like, faith of who he believes Daisy to be. Because Daisy and him have been, like, hanging out. They've been having their little, you know, they have been together, and she said that she's loved Gatsby, and so they do love each other, and Gatsby's just going off of faith and love, and he's like, she's never loved you, Tom. And then Daisy's sitting there like, and then he's like, oh yeah, like she has, like there's no way that she's never loved me, and blah blah blah. And so then Gatsby's like, yeah, she'll tell you, and she's leaving you too. Oh. And then he's like, she'll never leave me. And then
you're
Daisy's...
play-by-play right now. And this happened.
And then Nick and Jordan are just there, sitting there like, you know that meme of like the eyes and the mouth? I'll post that like on our Instagram for anybody
I feel
who
like
does
that's
not know.
Nick, but Jordan's like really into it.
Or like just the meme of the emoji of the standing person. Like that's them just being there while all of this is happening. Because they don't really say anything like this whole time. They just watch this happen. And it's kind of Gatsby just imploding on himself, which is kind of sad. Because he's saying all those things like, oh, she's never loved you. She's going to tell you that she's never loved you. And then he's like, okay, Daisy, like, you're up. Tell him that you never loved him. And then she's like, she can't do that. And she's like, no, like, I do love Gatsby. And it's true that I do love him. But, like, I loved Tom when we got married. And, like, I love Tom. And then Gatsby's like, what the? And so... kind of ends. They end up not making any mint juleps.
And she chooses to be with Tom instead of going off with Gatsby.
Wait, that's not yet, though.
That's kind of...
That's not like now.
I know, it's fine. It's fine.
We know that after the incident that's about
But
to
you know
occur.
she was leaning toward... Like, you knew in that moment she was leaning towards Tom. That's why Tom was okay with them going off together in the car. Because Tom knew, okay, I've won this.
Well, I don't think he knew that he won, but he knew that she wouldn't leave him.
That's winning for Tom. It's not like Tom cares if she loves him. Tom cares that his life looks picture perfect.
Yes, this is true. Because there is that part when he's like, well, women get this weird idea in their head that they can just run around with whoever. I'm just talking about Gatsby. But anyways, so after all of this happens, they're like, okay, we should leave and not drink. And Tom even like keeps trying to get Nick to drink. He's like, hey, you want some whiskey? And he's like, no. I'm pretty good. Mm-hmm. So then they all get back in the cars.
Same setup.
Yeah, the same setup of like who's in who's together. Car. And so they drive back. Although I guess I could have looked this up, but is Jordan is not with Nick and Tom.
I think so, yeah.
But she doesn't do anything when stuff happens. So I was like,
in the car ride she is, but like the rest of the story she's not.
I meant like in the car. I was never I was confused on where Jordan was the whole time.
I think she's definitely not in Gatsby's car.
That's what I thought.
I think she has. But I mean, she just doesn't. So matter.
Was she just sitting there?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's not like it matters for what we're talking about, really.
But anyways, so what happens is Jordan, questionable. I'm pretty sure she was with Nick and Tom, but whatever. She doesn't get mentioned when this happens, but they drive past the garage that belongs to the Wilsons, who we've mentioned before. As you remember, Myrtle Wilson is Tom's mistress. And so they drive past there to go back home as they're driving back to like the eggs in Long Island. But they're driving back, and there is a point when it kind of changes like the narration, and it just is describing like Mr. Wilson and then like her, and they're fighting, and she kind of runs out into the street because she recognizes the car. And so she tries and like talks to the people who are in the car, but it just keeps going, and it kind of seems to even speed up maybe a little bit, and it hits her like really bad. Like she's dead as soon as she hits the car.
Myrtle.
Yes, Myrtle. Like, yeah. And they even, this is something I didn't remember until I was reading it and listening to it, that they really described like how dead she was. They're like, she was dead. Like,
yeah, this says here Jordan was there.
Okay.
When Nick, Jordan, and Tom drove through the Valley of
That's
Ashes.
such an interesting. Okay, well then we can talk about how that's also like a Nick thing, because he doesn't mention her at all in this.
Yeah.
So that makes sense that she's kind of just there.
Yeah.
But because she doesn't find out what happens. He doesn't tell her. But anyways, so she's really dead.
Yeah.
And
they find out somebody had hit.
Yeah, so as they're driving past, because they're a little bit behind, Nick, Jordan, and Tom are a little bit behind Gatsby and Daisy in the car. They drive up and they're like, whoa, there's a crowd and there's a commotion. What is this? And they kind of pull over because obviously Tom knows where this is and Nick knows where this is as well. Mm-hmm. And so they're like, what happened? And then they like look into the street and there is a dead woman. And we know the woman, and it's Myrtle. And she's really dead. And Nick describes her as being extra dead because the way he describes it is like her boob is coming off. And
Nick.
Like, yeah, he's like, oh, her breast was hanging, so they didn't even bother to check if the heartbeat underneath was happening still. And I was like, why did he describe that?
It's very interesting to see how men used to write women. Like,
yes, super weird. I mean,
always
like, I guess that's relevant if it's like hanging off, but like,
but it's
why?
a fictional story, so did the breast have to be hanging off?
It didn't. It really didn't.
You could have done something else.
Her arm could come off or something.
I was just thinking of her arm. Her head could have been messed up.
Yeah, like that's like. I don't know why, but that's the part that obviously stuck out to me, and I was like, why? But anyways, so yeah, they're like, there's no way she's alive. Mm-hmm. And then obviously Tom is like freaking out. He's like, what is going on? And he's asking like, what happened? And then they're like, oh, there was a car and it just never stopped and it just was going so fast.
And they describe what the car
we don't know who it is. Yeah. So they describe the yellow car.
And
so
yeah, Gatsby
we all
is a
know.
very distinct car. It's the yellow one.
So we all know whose car it is. They know whose car it is. And so
hints.
Yeah.
Tom gives the idea of whose car it is.
Oh, not yet.
It doesn't matter what time it happened at.
It does.
Okay.
Because right now he doesn't know.
But when they find out whose car it is, he tells Wilson.
Yeah, but that's after this.
Okay.
Because it's important, trust me. I'm not trying to get too detailed. But so after, it's just like Mr. Wilson being very grief-stricken, and then they get back in the car, obviously, because they're like, okay, well, that's as much as we can do to help you. The cops are there. They're not very helpful, obviously. They're just like, oh, what car was it, everybody? And then they leave and they go back home. And then they kind of all know what happened because they know whose car it was. And then Nick talks to Gatsby after. And then Gatsby's talking to Nick and he's like, oh, like, you know, did you see, like, what happened? Like, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, yeah, she's dead. Really dead.
Why are you saying it like that?
Because they, like, Nick describes her as being, like, extra dead. Like, in a fancier way.
You need to know that she's dead.
Yes. He needs you to know that there was zero chance that she was alive. That she unalived. But anyways, Gatsby is talking to Nick, and Nick comes to the realization by himself. He's like, Daisy was driving your car.
Yeah.
And so Gatsby's like, yes, she was. So that is the reason that she killed her and sped up and kept driving. Because, yes.
Well, that's not assumed that she did it on purpose, because she didn't know that it was Tom's mistress.
It just all fell into place.
She's just erratic from the day and a little drunk and driving very fast in a fancy car.
Yeah, but Nick is the only one who can figure this out, apparently.
Yeah.
Which, I guess to his credit then, he is smarter than all these other people he's around.
But he's telling the story, so who knows if someone else figured it out, and he's just like, I'm the one that figured it out.
Well, to be fair, no one else really knows about the story except for, like, the 5 people.
But do we know?
Around him. I mean,
I know, I'm just making a point about how reliable is Nick, you know?
He's not, at all.
So that's what I'm saying. Do you know? Because Daisy could have been talking it up to Tom, for all we know.
Oh. But I don't think so, because...
I'm just...
I think Daisy would pretend to be stupid about it, you know?
Yeah.
But I guess we don't know because of what happens next.
I feel like, yeah, a woman maybe got hit, you know?
So what happens next is that after this, Gatsby actually hangs out in the Buchanan's yard, weirdly, because he's like, oh, I want to make sure, like, nothing happens. And if he, like, hits her, she's going to give me a signal of, like, turning the lights off and on, and then I can come up and rescue her. So I'm just waiting for the signal. And so then Nick was like, okay, that's cool. I'm going to go home and sleep. And so he gets, like, a taxi cab called for him, and then he goes home. But Gatsby never gets that signal. we find out, and that's the last time he ever gets to talk to Daisy. And that next morning is when he's telling Nick about this, and Nick talks to Gatsby for the last time, and this is when we get that famous quote, which I think I have it pulled up. Hopefully I do. Oh no, I don't think I do. Okay, hang on. I will find it, but
she will find it.
Pretty much he has a discussion with Gatsby, and he's talking about what happened and how it was Daisy who was driving, and then Gatsby's like, oh, it'll be okay, like we're just like not gonna bring out the car, nobody's gonna know it was us, it'll be fine. He kind of seems a little dejected because Daisy never like gave him that signal, but he kind of is he's still wearing his like bright pink suit that Nick describes him in, that's like bringing him life, and he does describe like this suit like a few more times. But so when he's like talking about that, this is when we just kind of like see their last interactions, and he gives like the famous quote, you were worth the let's see, hang on. Okay, so he
Nick's
tells
deep
Gatsby,
love for Gatsby's coming up.
this is like his he tells Gatsby that he's worth the whole damn bunch of them put together, and he's referring to like Tom and Daisy and
probably
Jordan, because they're all rotten, and he wants Gatsby to know that he also knows that they're all rotten, which should include Gatsby, but anyways, that's like his last lines to him pretty much. And Nick describes it in a very like romantic way, saying like, I was always so glad that I told him that. But yeah, so he tells Gatsby that he's better than like all of them, and he holds him to a higher pedestal, and then Gatsby's just kind of like, cool, thanks, bye. And then that is it, because as we find out later, Gatsby tells his like servants that if anybody calls for him, just to tell, like, phone it down to him or whatever, because he's going to be in the pool, which we did get a quote earlier. Finally. A few times, like he was like, oh, I haven't used it all summer.
Yeah.
And it's mentioned like twice that he's never used the pool, and he wants to use the pool. And so he finally uses his little floaty mattress, and he brings it out to the pool, and he's just chilling in the pool, and Mr. Wilson comes and shoots him. And then he shoots himself. So Mr. Wilson dies by suicide, and he kills Gatsby as well. And this is because we find out shortly after this, when Nick is talking to Tom, that Tom kind of implies to Mr. Wilson that it was Gatsby. And because Mr. Wilson had been running around asking about like if anybody knew about the yellow car. And then Tom was like, well, I know whose car that is, that's Gatsby. And then, because obviously he doesn't like Gatsby. And so then Nick is like appalled by Tom, and then Tom's like, well, Gatsby got what was coming to him, like he deserved it. And so that's why I was saying that I'm pretty sure that he does think that Gatsby killed the woman, and like he obviously hated Gatsby because of Daisy, but I'm pretty sure that he does think that like Gatsby did kill her.
I don't know, I might have to disagree with you on that. I feel like I think him and Daisy share a lot more than we see.
And I feel like not.
Yeah.
I feel like
but would it matter to him? He still would have
it wouldn't. Yeah. But I just think that even if he did know, he would have done the same thing. But in my opinion, the way he says it with such certainty, like he wants to seem like he's the smart one, you know? Like he wants to seem like he's in charge of the situation. So he's like, yeah, well,
that's fair.
He did that, so it all comes back around. But by going by that standard, then Daisy's about to get some crazy karma coming back around. But yeah, so that's kind of the end of Gatsby's life. And we talk about his funeral just a little bit with Nick's point of view.
I was going to say the funeral feels important.
Yes, and that's kind of like how it closes. So there's the funeral.
Yeah, and not surprisingly though, nobody except Nick and Gatsby's dad show up.
Yes, and Gatsby's dad only shows up because there was like paparazzi who were taking photos and stuff, and it ended up like in the Chicago newspapers. Yeah. And Nick had actually held out on having like a funeral service for just like a few days. I think it was like 3 days or so. because he was trying to get people to come to Gatsby's funeral and talk to like his friends or like any of the people who came to his parties. And that's when Nick kind of like has that realization of like, oh, all these people were like so brave to talk about Gatsby drunk on his alcohol, but like they won't even like come to his funeral and pay respects and all that jazz. And there is another character who does come to his funeral, who is like described as like the owl guy.
Oh yes.
Who was a guy who they met, in Gatsby's library in one of the parties. Which like there's something there. Yeah. And I would like to dig a little bit more at that. Yeah. But
he might have just been coming for the show though. Yeah. He seemed very interested in just like observing.
Yeah, which is bizarre. Yes. But yeah, so he meets Gatsby's father, and then they hold off the funeral until Gatsby's father gets there. And so they're the only cars that are like in the procession, and they go to his gravestone. He learns about Gatsby's father, and Gatsby's father is like super proud of Gatsby and like looking around the big house and everything. And he tells Nick that like he's living in the house that Gatsby had now bought for him. He hadn't seen him for like 2 years, I think it was, but then he's just walking around and he's like in awe of what Gatsby became. And so Nick is kind of, I don't know, maybe kind of like feels a little better. Yeah. Knowing that Gatsby's father is proud of him, which is interesting, also kind of plays into some weird relationship aspects.
Yeah,
but
it does.
I think he can be a little bit at peace because he knows that at least somebody was there. Yeah. Because that was very
But it definitely deeply upset him that no one that came to his parties cared.
Yeah. That was like a big thing. And it's like that whole ending is just him talking about trying to get people to come to his funeral, which is like really sad. But yes. So that happens. The funeral happens.
Tom and Daisy get off free.
Yes. And the fun part is that he tries to tell Daisy when Gatsby gets murdered, but she might not even have known that Gatsby got murdered because they just left. Yeah. Tom and Daisy just fucking left. Yeah. And he tried to talk, like, Nick tried to find them, and then he has his servants, like, okay, well, like, where can I reach them? Like, what phone number do I call? And they're like, we don't know, they're just gone. And so they just left because they're cowards. And so, they just left, and Nick never spoke to them again.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize Nick ends up moving back home.
Yes. He leaves because he said that, like, it's been poisoned. The East had been poisoned for him because of all of that. So he does move back home.
So that's basically the plot. I mean, that's most of the plot, honestly.
Yeah.
But the reason I wanted to say that last thing about him going home is because that's one of the major, like, symbolic things people always talk about with The Great Gatsby is how it's, like, a commentary on the American dream. And one of the symbolic things that's happening in the book is, like, everyone that went from west to east, which we kind of already mentioned a little bit, like, things do not go well for them. Like, Gatsby, Tom, Daisy, Nick, all come from the east or the west from, like, the Chicago area. They go east, which goes against the ideal of, like, going west. And so, like, just bad shit happens to them. And so Nick ultimately goes back west and realizes, no, this is where I'm supposed to be. And there's just a few other, like, little hints of, like, Gatsby, for example. He does all of the stuff that they say is what you do to get the American dream. He makes money, he does all this stuff, but yet he's never accepted, which is, like, that term nouveau riche. Like, he's always considered the new rich, so he's not even a part of, like, the upper class that he tries so hard to get a part of. He's just still considered an outsider no matter what he does.
Because if you weren't born into the money, then it doesn't matter if you have the money.
So it's just, like, a commentary on, like, is the American dream a thing? Can it happen?
Can it happen for anybody who doesn't already have that?
Yeah. So that's a very common thing this book touches on. Same with the unreliable narration, as we've discussed, and that's why you can assume things about Nick, like his sexuality, and it's very interesting. This book is jam-packed, like we said, for such a small...
And I feel like, obviously, we did, like, talk through the plot, but also I mentioned a few things that I thought were symbolic or...
Yeah. Plus, we went off on a lot of this stuff already.
Yes, I was like, okay, the things we have to bring up now. And I'm like, wait, we've talked about, like, 5 of these already. Exactly. But I think it is important, since we kind of come to that part when we're like, symbolism. We mentioned the green light. And Lord. But at the very end of the novel, he talks about the green light, which I think is important, because that last line of the book is about, like, boats and the green light. Because he's kind of, like, looking at the light on his, like, last night in Long Island. Yeah. And so he's kind of just, like, looking and he's contemplating things of like what people might have also felt when they first came there. So he's like, oh, like how did everybody else feel before me? But so like he sees that light and then he can feel what he thinks that Gatsby felt when he saw the light for the first time.
But again, an assumption.
Yes, but that's how Nick describes it.
No, yeah.
But I'm saying,
that's
like,
what I'm saying, like, Nick
he believes that to be true, but
yeah,
he can't even fact check that with Gatsby because Gatsby's in the ground. But he kind of says it like it's almost like tangible, like he can like reach out and touch it. And I thought that was also I thought that was also interesting because there is a part earlier in the book when Nick is describing about how those like fantasy things of like the green light, once they became real, like once Daisy and Gatsby started actually having their affair and it wasn't just like a dream to him anymore, that it fell out of being a fantasy. So like once it becomes real life, it's like more difficult and there's more blocks in the road. But I don't know, I just thought that was interesting. The green light, what does that symbolize? You know, something that's supposed to be fantastical, and then once you get it, you're like, oh, this kind of sucks.
Honestly, probably part of the American dream thing of like,
yes,
oh, see, this is something you can get, and then yet it's always out of reach.
Yes.
Because Daisy's out of reach, the light's out of reach, so everything's always just out of reach.
You saying that kind of just brought that up. In my mind, makes me think that it is always out of reach, and no matter what he does with Daisy, she will always be out of his reach because the Daisy he's trying to get with is the Daisy from 5 years ago, and she can never come back.
And even that Daisy probably was never really gonna pick him. He's poor.
Exactly. So like that Daisy was always out of reach. The Daisy that loved him and he loved her when they didn't have to worry about money because she had money. But when they didn't have to worry about money and she didn't have to think about her future, like that Daisy was never gonna exist again. So we do have also that theme that we can kind of just go into now about the past and repeating the past. And Nick says something to Gatsby about like, well, you can't repeat the past. And Gatsby's like, well, why not? It's a little bit more eloquent than that, but...
Yikes. I love that you did like the subtle Gatsby voice.
I know.
Why not?
I'm trying to not do my bad impersonation of 1920s people again, but anyways.
Everyone else is normal, but then Gatsby's like, hello there.
Yes, that was good.
Thank you.
But yeah, so he's kind of just like, well, why can't I have this thing that I've pictured in my mind for 5 years exactly how I want it to be?
Which is why he unhinges at that dinner, because not that dinner, but that climax of the story, because
it's not how he saw. And I feel like obviously we cannot relate on that level, but that's a part of the story where you can be like, okay, like I can understand that as a person, because there's so many things that you think in life, like it's gonna go like this and then this is gonna happen, and then you get there and you're like, well, it's not like that at all. And
bleak.
The image of what you have will never exist, so even if that's a real thing that can happen, it's intangible always.
You're making me think of Soul. When he finished playing the piano, he's like, this doesn't feel right.
Please watch the Pixar film Soul. It's very good.
Because I feel like you just described like the whole thing about like the dangers of like looking for something coming up. Yep.
So that's pretty much the green light and the theme of repeating the past. All wrapped up in one.
This time I'm ready to run. That was not the song I meant to quote. One Direction.
Oh no.
What was I trying to say? I was trying to quote green light, but we've been doing this for a while now.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have any other symbols or themes you wanted to bring up?
I can't anymore.
Because those were like my two big ones.
Mine was... Sorry, I said that quote, so my brain stopped working
okay.
Completely.
I just don't think about One Direction.
Hard. Mine was being unreliable, which I've already discussed. I love looking at like the little things I've already said, like you see he's unreliable with like the oxymorons and like the obvious things, but then I love looking at the little details of like I don't know, like I just can't get over him being like, I am a very calm person, but here are all the times I've lost my temper. It's like, okay.
Or like I've only been drunk twice in my life. And then like the next page is like, and we were drinking.
Yeah.
Like Vikings. But yeah, something we didn't talk about was the sign that we have. For anybody who's actually watching, we do have the eyes of Dr. TJ,
which kind of goes into some of the stuff we've already talked about.
Yes, we didn't really discuss, but this is kind of just like an old billboard that's hanging up
In the Valley of the Ashes.
Yes, which is like when you're traveling between the eggs.
Where Myrtle is.
Yes. Where the,
It's not between the eggs, actually. It's between the eggs and the New York.
Okay, yeah. Between the eggs and
I feel like you were going to say that.
But...
The eggs. Really Staten Island, but
the eggs.
Say the eggs.
Well, they're described as eggs in the book. Yeah. I just like to say the eggs.
No, I would say the eggs too.
But anyways, it's actually right across from the garage where the Wilsons are, because when Mr. Wilson is having the breakdown about his wife just being murdered in front of him, he starts going crazy talking to, it's like the neighbor of his next door who comes to comfort him. And he starts going crazy, talking about like God and like the eyes of God, because he's staring right at these eyes that are
that
watching
would be
him.
Pretty unsettling, just having like a giant billboard of eyes just always watching you. So
that's like another thing that gets kind of brought up. That's like a symbol, and that's like on every single Great Gatsby
the main cover.
That's what those eyeballs are.
I always like the women, or maybe not women, but the people as the color part of the eyes.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Right there, that's people.
Oh, I guess I've never noticed that.
Yeah.
I feel like I still can't see it. It looks like blobs to me.
That's an arm.
We'll look at it more in depth later.
But those are people in the eyes.
Okay, I trust you, but I just cannot see it right now. But that's cool. Because that's like, I believe this is the original cover. I think the one we have up is like from the movie, from the new movie, if I'm not mistaken.
But it just looked cool.
But I really like this one because in the book they talk about how it's a spectacled thing, so I never understood why on the cover it's like there is no glasses. But anyways,
so is this, then that asks the question, is this the same face?
I want to say it's not, but you're supposed to think about how the eyeballs are watching.
Yeah.
But I think because
it's crying. God
or religion is not important in this novel at all. It's actually not brought up until then, and that's the only time that it's really mentioned at all. And even like Gatsby's funeral, you don't know that it's religious until they're like, the Lutheran minister came up, and you're like, oh, okay, he's Lutheran, I guess. But
my only guess is maybe in the 20s that was obvious.
Maybe it could have been, but yeah. So like, it's not like a big theme about religion and anything. Like I said, like a lot of the novel is very indulgent. It's all about like them seeking out their own pleasures and like enjoying life.
But it's a bad thing.
Yes, exactly. Like at the cost of others, but they don't really care. So it's all about that, and so having like that idea of like watching, is very
being
interesting.
Disappointed.
Yes, and like they don't even care. And I mean, the only person who actually brings up the eyes that we know is because Nick talks about it in like his narrations. And so nobody ever is talking about like, oh, that weird billboard over there. But yeah, it's just something to think about. Like, that's just kind of something that's mentioned a few times. So you can be like, is this us judging them maybe as an audience, like the outside looking in? Or is that supposed to be like they're disappointing a higher power?
Yeah, it's definitely really common, like a very common thing to think like it's God watching, but it is more fun to figure out.
I kind of like the idea of like it's just, you know, us looking in.
Oh,
just us peeking in there.
I saw something earlier when I was doing the research that was really interesting that I want to bring up. I will give SparkNotes the credit. When they said another explanation, it was just about the eyes. It was
for the eyes.
Yeah. I wanted to read this because it said something interesting about like, so everyone always is like, oh, it's God, it's God, it's God watching, it's all this stuff. And then this was really interesting. So like Marina said, we don't really see it a lot. It's only when Nick talks about it, but it's also the person who's focusing on it is Wilson, like she said in his grief. And on SparkNotes, they say, this lack of concrete significance contributes to the unsettling nature of images. Thus, the eyes also come to represent the essential meaninglessness of the world and the arbitrariness, they say ness words too much in this, of the mental process by which people invest objects with meaning. So like,
ooh, I like that.
Yeah,
that's
basically saying like people give too much meaning to things. And then it says, so just basically like, does that even mean anything? Or do we just have to find meaning and stuff? Which feels like a commentary on religion.
That is really, I was going to say that's really interesting because like when Mr. Wilson is having like that breakdown and his neighbor is like comforting him and Wilson's like, oh, it's God, the eyes of God. And then he's like, no, that's just Dr. Eckelberg. Like, you know him. It's just a billboard. That's fine. It's nothing. And so that is kind of like literally saying like that in dialogue. And he's like going crazy. And he's like, no, that's just a billboard. Like, I don't know what you're talking about, guy. Like, that's normal. So that's interesting. I like that.
Which makes you think about everything else that's like a symbol in everything we do, including in this book. Is just like, were these symbols?
Did Nick
just give them meaning to find meaning? And
things have meaning and they don't have meaning, but we attach meanings to them that either aren't there or were there.
Because this even points out, like, Nick does that by assuming Gatsby's final thoughts when really we don't know Gatsby's final thoughts at all. And all this stuff. So yeah, pretty bleak, but don't we love a bleak story? I do. Yes. Don't know why, but
I will say, I guess we didn't really talk about, they kind of find out a little bit how Gatsby gets money. Yeah. He has drugstores, which, like, aren't really drugstores and, like, would sell liquor and stuff. But, yeah, so he was kind of just in a lot of illegal, sketchy things, like bootlegging.
And a lot of this was happening also during the Prohibition. Yeah. And then, like, right after the Prohibition, so it was the time to bootleg. Yeah.
So he had a lot of sketchy things going on, and that's how he made all his money. They kind of find that out, like, later.
Which I think partly goes back to why Daisy doesn't choose him, because she prefers stability over, like, what makes her happy. Yes. So the stability with Tom is much easier.
Yeah, and like I said, so what I was trying to say when I was like, oh, we don't know that she chooses him yet. I feel like, at least from Nick's point of view, we didn't know that until he talked to them, like the servants, and they had just left. Yeah. And then that was apparent to him, that it was like she chose Tom.
For me, it feels more obvious, because, like, they've even talked about in, like, other things, it's like, Tom was so confident that he was like, yeah, drive my wife home. I don't care. Where before he was pissed off about it. But now he's like, no, go in the car with him. Because he kind of knew, like, it's going to drive her even more crazy. Yeah. Being with this guy who's coming unhinged and is obviously not what she thought he was and isn't the stability and the calm that she wants. Yeah.
Really, Daisy's just a coward. And if she cared about her actual happiness, she would have gone with Gatsby, in my opinion. Yeah. I mean, like, Gatsby, I'm not saying, like, he's better than Tom because everybody's shitty. But I feel like if Daisy wasn't a coward, she would have just gone with Gatsby. But she is a coward, and she'd rather just stay the same and have money and be stable.
And I feel like some people's...
a pretty little fool.
Yeah, and I feel like some people's argument could be like, but her daughter, but we know Daisy doesn't care.
She doesn't care about her daughter.
Daisy doesn't think of that. Like, because I know some parents do, like, oh, well, I'll stay here because it'll make my daughter happier. No,
that's not part of the argument at all.
It's purely just Daisy's, like, comfort of getting to lounge on the couch. Yes. Not have to go through a divorce, which I get. A divorce is messy in the 20s, but, like... Yeah. He's got money. Like, you'll figure it out.
Yeah, that's pretty much what she feels. Yeah. Because she grew up super rich, and that was all that was ever expected of her, was to stay rich. Mm-hmm. Marry somebody who's rich, stay rich. Yeah. Have kids, and then they'll be rich. And then so on and so forth. Yeah. And that's pretty much it.
So, yeah.
And I guess that's, like, the themes. We've talked about the movie quite a bit. We've talked about, like, the newer movie, the 2013 movie.
Yeah,
there is also another one, a 1974, and I think the oldest one was 1949, I think I saw. I haven't seen either of those, full disclaimer. I've seen the 2013 one only, but...
kind of hard to find.
I thought that adaptation, in my opinion, was pretty good. I know people have mixed opinions on it, because it does have, like... modern contemporary music mixed in, and like you said, it's a very surrealist feel.
Yeah, which I remember when I first watched it, I didn't like the surrealist feel going on. But now thinking about how unreliable Nick is, it kind of adds to that, because you're like, this isn't clear, it's foggy, just like Nick's telling of the story is foggy. So
oh no, did I get like an email?
Maybe.
But yeah,
so yeah. That's The Great Gatsby.
Yes.
Obviously, we enjoy this book. We could go on and on. There's a bajillion
There's
themes.
Just so many things to say.
And all the themes we talked about are pretty common themes, so there's probably even stuff that, like...
yeah, that we haven't even gotten to.
Yeah. That's just like, what the...
yeah. It's just, there's a lot to dissect in this. And it's so interesting. I almost like, not to be like, I liked this better, or like, you know, not comparing it to, like, books that we've already read, but I do like when it's such like a concentrated, like, this happened over the course of like 3 months, maybe less. It was over the course of one summer. It involves like 5 people, you know. It's when stories are like that, I just find them to be so interesting.
It is more interesting when they like really tighten up.
Yes.
So yeah.
But I think we can both say that we did enjoy it. Something that I wanted to do, like, really fast, that I think we might have done in, like, our first and second episode and never did it again, was, do you have a favorite character of the book?
I don't think so. It's hard to pick because I do kind of want to say Gatsby a little bit because I think
Gatsby then.
Gatsby. I have like sympathy for him. Like I know he's a little messed up, but like I do feel bad. Like especially thinking about like
do you think he was happy when he died in the pool? Obviously, it happened fast because he was shot. But
I want to say yes. Like I know it's kind of ambiguous.
Yeah.
Especially because I think he died fast, probably. So I think right before he was shot, because I think he genuinely believed Daisy cared about him.
Yeah.
But I also don't know if that's a bias because, again, I've seen the movie a lot, and in the movie, he gets a call from somebody else, and he thinks it's Daisy.
Oh,
so in the movie, it makes it pretty clear that he's like, oh, Daisy, but that's
the way
not
Nick
in the book.
describes it, I always felt like it was kind of bittersweet because he's like, he tells them to leave, like, to bring the phone to him if there's a call. But the way Nick kind of describes it is like he knows that he's not going to get a call, but he's doing that thing where you kind of just pretend like you don't know that that's going to happen. So I feel like he's kind of just pretending, which is what he's really good at. I feel like it's
just so hard for me to trust like Nick saying that because it's like Nick's telling this already knowing Daisy didn't call and already knowing like he's dead, so he's going to be like, oh.
But I was just saying, I think because he didn't get that signal, that secret light on, light off, that I feel like he still did have like that hope of like Daisy's gonna come back to him. So I feel like it is bittersweet because he was probably just like, oh no, she didn't call, but she will. And then
I think he still had a little hope. But yeah, I want to say Gatsby. Maybe Nick, but I don't know. He does lie a little too much. I mean, Gatsby's entire life is a lie, but it's for like Gatsby's doing it because he's like blind in love, where Nick's more just like he just is kind of fibbing.
Yeah, that's true.
I've never said that in my life.
He's just fibbing. We try out new things here. Yeah.
Who's yours?
I would say I decided as I was listening to the audiobook that Jordan was probably my favorite. I didn't think I had a favorite character reading it. But then as I was listening to it, I just thought it was so funny every time that Nick would describe when these conversations were happening, and Jordan is just like there.
Yeah.
I know we were making fun of it, like how Nick is always just there, but like Jordan is always just there, like because then she's with Nick, but then Nick doesn't even like pay all that much attention to her. So then she's kind of just the fly on the wall to the fly on the wall, which I think is really funny. And like I said, she's just really messy, but like in a
it would be fun to read this book from her point of view.
Yes, like she's just messy to be messy. Yeah. You know, like that Marie Kondo meme that's like, I love mess. Yeah. Like I feel like that's her, and I really love that about a character. Like I know she's probably trash, and she probably cheated on that golf tournament.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that's hilarious, and I would love to see a novel from her point of view.
Yeah, it would be crazy.
I mean, Great Gatsby's in the public domain now. There was a bunch of memes about that. Somebody,
so right.
Please write from her perspective. And how
she's
just loving the mess. But yeah, I would say she's my favorite.
XOXO.
Yes! Oh my god, she would be Gossip Girl.
I heard from a little birdie that Mr. Gatsby is in love with one Daisy. I've never seen Gossip Girl, so...
That's a lie. You've seen some.
Okay, I've seen like an episode because my mom, I don't know you're watching this, watches it, and I would watch it with her to be nice, and then she'd fall asleep.
Yeah,
but
because you did the Gossip Girl voice way too good.
Oh, well, I've also heard it online.
I know. It's like a
And I've seen like,
I saw the first season.
Kristen Bell doing the voice on like TV shows too.
Oh, okay. It's funny.
I wasn't trying to be cool, I just genuinely don't like this show.
I mean,
but I do enjoy going like,
XOXO.
Gossip Girl here.
Gossip Girl memes are always funny. Even if you've never seen Gossip Girl, I think you just get them.
A new guy, Nick, is in town, and he is kind of cute.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's a good voice.
I'm just gonna write everything from Jordan doing Gossip Girl.
That would be a great book. Yeah, a great, like, short story adaptation.
Yeah.
Make it happen.
We'll do that.
Okay.
Sorry.
If you guys would buy that when we release it in a few months, just let us know.
Please.
But yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, that's it for us.
I think we talked about like favorite parts before, but I feel like we kind of covered that.
I also don't really have like a favorite part, so
I would say my favorite part is just the confrontation.
Yeah.
Because it feels very low stakes because it's just a bunch of people yelling in a room to each other.
It's
a bunch of rich people yelling in a room, and that's it. And that's the climax of the book. And I realized that, and I loved it. The way it's written is so good. Just that Nick's like, oh my gosh, this is happening. And like I said, it's just them sitting there while
sweating.
They're sweating and yelling at each other.
Like The Bachelor.
No wonder I like The Bachelor now.
Tasha's season.
Everybody's sweating outside. the drama.
What's up?
But yeah, I think that's going to be it for the novel. I will say we did run a poll, and if you're not on any of our social medias, you should be, because you can help us in the future decide more books on what we're going to do.
Definitely fun.
But we had you guys choose our next book, which will be George Orwell's Animal Farm.
Ooh,
so
more
this
George
is going to be our
Orwell.
first repeat author.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
So that'll be kind of fun. We haven't done that
Yeah.
yet. Animal Farm, I feel
Been
like
waiting
is a
for this
staple.
one.
I'm very excited to do this one.
I think this one and Lord of the Flies were the two that I was like, let's go.
Oh my gosh. I have a lot to say about Lord of the
I
Flies.
do too.
But we'll get there when we get there. Maybe we'll put that in our next poll.
Yeah.
We'll actually have you guys maybe decide the next one too, just for fun.
Yeah, it's fun.
We would love to read more reviews, so if you guys want to leave us a review, that would be great.
Yeah.
Takes 2 seconds, I promise. We would love you forever for it.
We would.
But yeah, I think that might be it for
Yeah,
us today.
like, subscribe, whatever you're on, whether it's the YouTube videos or the podcasts, whatever platform you like. Or just do all the platforms.
We're so close to having 100 likes and
Yeah.
follows on Facebook. I think we reached 100 follows, but not 100 likes. So if you've done one of those and not the other, just double check really quick. We would love to hit both, and then maybe we can do like a fun like giveaway or something.
Ooh, yeah.
We'll announce that on our socials, so please go look. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. And it's all linked in our bios on any of those. So if you can find us on one and
The
click in our bio,
link tree that Marina made.
then you can find us everywhere. So please do that.
Check out old episodes.
Yes, they're all in our
Maybe
bio
catch
as well.
up on 1984 since we're doing George Orwell.
Oh yeah, if you want to refresh maybe on him a little bit, what his philosophies are, or maybe what we believe them to be.
Our take.
Yeah, then you can watch that too.
Yeah.
And I think that will be it for
That
us
will be it
today.
for us.
Thanks so much for joining us in the 20s, whether that be the 1920s or maybe 2020, since Monica's repping the e-girl style today.
Which is just our own clothes.
Yeah, that's just a regular outfit.
It's
for me.
Marina's shirt.
But yeah, so thanks for coming back with us.
Thank you. Hope to see
We're
you
very
next
excited
month.
to see you guys again. So
In April.
yes,
Bye.
Bye.